The flash of police strobes painted Rocco Gallo's face in stark blues and reds, catching the sweat on his brow as he was slammed against the hood of a black sedan. He was a bull of a man, thick-necked and brutal, but in that moment his eyes were wide with the terror of a cornered animal. The clink of handcuffs was deafening in the sudden silence of the opulent ballroom. He twisted his head, his gaze sweeping past the horrified faces of the city's elite until it found her. She stood across the room, a ghost in a silk gown, her expression as calm and placid as a frozen lake. "Who are you?" he bellowed, the sound raw and desperate. The question was a wound. He had built an empire on knowing who held the power, on crushing anyone who dared to challenge him. But her, he didn't know her. She didn't answer. She just watched, and in her silence, Rocco Gallo finally understood that he had never been the predator. He had only ever been the prey. 2 weeks earlier, the scent of garlic and simmering marinara hung heavy in the air at Trattoria Bellucci. It was the kind of place that prided itself on old-world charm and extortionate prices. Calla, known here only as Mia, moved between tables with an economy of motion that spoke of long, grueling shifts. Her uniform was simple, her hair tied back in a severe knot, and her face was a carefully constructed mask of polite indifference. The front doors swung open with a crash, admitting a blast of cold city air, and Rocco, the bull Gallo. He moved not like a man entering a restaurant, but like a conquering general entering a city he'd just burned to the ground. 2 mountains of muscle in ill-fitting suits flanked him, their eyes scanning the room for threats. The maître d', a man named Julian, with the posture of a frightened flamingo, scurried forward. "Mr. Gallo, what an unexpected pleasure. I'm afraid we are fully booked this evening." Rocco didn't even look at him. He pointed a sausage-like finger at a prime corner booth where a young couple was celebrating an anniversary. "I want that one. Tell them to leave." Julian paled. "Sir, I can't possibly." Calla stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Julian's arm. "I'll handle it, Julian." She turned her gaze to Rocco, her expression unreadable. "Sir, the couple is celebrating a special occasion. Perhaps the table by the window? The view of the city is quite lovely tonight." Rocco's eyes, small and dark like chips of obsidian, finally focused on her. He looked her up and down, a slow, greasy appraisal that made her skin crawl. A smirk spread across his lips. "The view is fine right here." He snapped his fingers, a sound like a breaking twig. "The booth. Now." Calla held his gaze for a beat longer than a waitress should. There was no fear in her eyes, only a profound emptiness that seemed to momentarily unnerve him. Then the mask slipped back into place. She nodded curtly and approached the couple, speaking to them in a low, apologetic tone. They left quickly, casting terrified glances over their shoulders. Rocco and his men settled into the booth, their presence sucking the warmth and laughter from the room. The meal was a performance of power. He sent back a bottle of wine that cost more than Calla's monthly rent, claiming it was corked. He spoke loudly on his phone about shipments and problems that needed to be handled. He treated Calla not as a person, but as a piece of furniture that brought him things. When the check came, he tossed a black credit card onto the table. Calla ran it and returned with the slip. Rocco scribbled a signature, then paused, looking at the empty tip line. He looked up at Calla, a cruel glint in his eye. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp new $100 bill. For a second, the air in the restaurant held a collective breath of surprise. Then, with deliberate slowness, Rocco crumpled the bill into a tight ball. He picked up his half-full glass of water, dropped the wet wad of cash into it, and pushed it across the table. The bill slowly unfurled, a sunken flag of green in the bottom of the glass. There you go, sweetheart, Rocco grunted, his men snickering beside him. A little something for your trouble. Wash it before you spend it. The restaurant fell into a tomb-like silence. Every eye was on Calla. They saw a waitress being humiliated, a young woman being ground under the heel of a powerful man. They saw a victim. Calla looked at the glass. She looked at Rocco's leering face. She felt the burning stares of 24 strangers. A muscle in her jaw twitched. She offered him a small, tight smile. Thank you, sir. You're too generous. She picked up the glass, her movement steady, and walked away. Rocco Gallo threw his head back and laughed, the sound echoing in the silent room. He was a king in his castle, and he had just reminded everyone of their place. He had no idea he had just signed his own death warrant. The elevator opened directly into a sprawling penthouse that seemed to float among the clouds, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city's glittering sprawl. Calla stepped inside, the click of the door sealing off the world of Mia the waitress. She peeled off the cheap polyester uniform, letting it fall to the floor like a shed skin. A man emerged from the shadows. He was tall and lean, with the quiet intensity of a wolf. This was Silas, her castellan, her confessor, her right hand. He held out a silk robe. "How was the service industry tonight, ma'am?" he asked, his voice a low baritone. Calla took the robe, her movements fluid and graceful, a stark contrast to the weary shuffle she affected at the restaurant. "Enlightening," she said, her voice dropping to its natural timbre, cool and clear as spring water. "Rocco Gallo is precisely the pig the reports described, possibly worse." She walked over to a wall that looked like polished obsidian. With a touch, it shimmered to life, transforming into a bank of high-resolution monitors. "Engage playback. Trattoria Bellucci, table 9. The scene from the restaurant replayed, captured from multiple angles. One was from a micro-camera hidden in the lapel pin of her uniform. The image was startlingly clear. "Amplify ambient audio," Calla commanded. "Target Gallo and subject 2. Isolate vocals." Silas typed a few commands onto a tablet. The general murmur of the restaurant faded away, and Rocco's voice, a low rumble beneath his public bluster, became sharp and distinct. He was talking to Frankie, his weaselly lieutenant. "The shipment from the Albanians is coming in Tuesday. Pier 9, midnight. I want you to handle the pickup personally. No screw-ups this time." Calla's eyes narrowed. She activated another program, a sophisticated lip-reading software that synced with the video, confirming the words. "He's getting sloppy, discussing business in a public place." "Arrogance is a terminal disease, Silas," Calla murmured, watching the screen as the digital version of Rocco dropped the crumpled bill into the water glass. "And Mr. Gallo's case appears to be in its final stages. He believes the world is his stage, and we are all just unpaid extras." She paused the video on a close-up of Rocco's laughing face. "He thinks because I wear an apron, I can't see. Because I take his order, I can't hear. He sees a waitress, a nobody. He's about to learn that the most dangerous people in this city are the ones nobody sees at all." She turned to Silas, the last vestiges of Mia gone, replaced by the chilling authority of a woman who commanded shadows. "The shipment at Pier 9. I don't want it. I want it to disappear. Scuttle the boat, dump the cargo. I want it to vanish without a trace. Leave just enough evidence to point to the Irish syndicate. Let's see how the bull likes it when someone kicks over his trough." Silas nodded once. "Consider it done." "And Silas," she added, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Get me everything you can on him. Financials, political ties, private vices. I want to know where he sleeps, who he pays, and what he fears. He threw his money in my face. I'm going to take his entire world." Rocco Gallo sat in his leather throne of an office chair, a cloud of expensive cigar smoke wreathing his head. He was not a happy man. He slammed a heavy fist on his mahogany desk, making a crystal glass of whiskey jump. "Vanished!" he roared, his face purple with rage. "What do you mean, vanished? A $20 million shipment of military-grade hardware doesn't just vanish." Frankie flinched, holding a phone away from his ear. "The boat is at the bottom of the harbour, boss. The feds are crawling all over the pier. Word on the street is O'Malley's crew hit it." "O'Malley doesn't have the balls," Rocco spat. "Someone else is playing games. Someone new. How did they know?" He paced the room like a caged bear, his mind racing. A leak in his organization? A snitch? His contacts in the police department were coming up with nothing. It was clean. Too clean. The lack of information was more terrifying than an open declaration of war. Frankie, ever the sycophant, saw an opportunity to be useful. "Boss," I was thinking, "that night at the restaurant, remember that waitress?" Rocco stopped pacing. "The one with the smart mouth? What about her?" "Well, she was right there, at the table. When you were talking," Frankie said carefully, "and she gave you a look. I saw it. It wasn't a scared look. It was something else. What if she heard something? What if she works for someone?" Rocco stared at him. The idea was absurd. A waitress? A minimum wage nobody? But his ego, bruised and battered by the loss of the shipment, latched on to the suggestion. The thought that some lowly girl might have gotten one over on him was an intolerable insult. It was personal. The memory of her calm, steady eyes as he'd humiliated her returned to him. It hadn't been fear. Frankie was right. It had been something else. Contempt. "That little roach," he growled, the pieces clicking into place in his paranoid mind. She was the leak. She had to be. It was the only explanation that satisfied his wounded pride. "Find her," Rocco snarled, his eyes turning cold. "Find that waitress. Bring her to me. I'm going to pull her apart, piece by piece, until she tells me who she's working for. We'll see how brave she is when she's not hiding behind a tray of drinks." The alley behind the trattoria was dark and smelled of stale beer and garbage. Calla, back in her Mia persona, was walking toward the bus stop, the picture of an exhausted service worker. She heard the footsteps behind her. Too heavy, too fast. She didn't break her stride. Two of Rocco's thugs, the same ones from the restaurant, grabbed her. One clamped a beefy, foul-smelling hand over her mouth. The other twisted her arm behind her back. "The boss wants to have a word with you, sweetheart," one of them grunted in her ear. Calla didn't fight. She didn't scream. She went limp, letting them drag her toward a black van with tinted windows. She allowed a few terrified sobs to escape, playing the part they expected. They were clumsy, arrogant, and utterly predictable. They thought they were dragging a lamb to the slaughter. They had no idea they were carrying a viper into their own nest. As they shoved her into the van, her hand brushed against the lapel pin on her worn coat, pressing it twice in a silent, urgent signal. The hunt had just become personal. The air in the warehouse was cold and thick with the smell of rust and motor oil. Calla was bound to a steel chair, the rough ropes chafing her wrists. Her head was down, her hair falling across her face, her body trembling in a convincing display of terror. Rocco Gallo circled her like a shark. So, the little mouse has a name. Mia. A pretty name for a rat. He stopped in front of her, grabbing a fistful of her hair and yanking her head back. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Calla looked up, her eyes wide and brimming with manufactured tears. "Please, I don't know anything. I'm just a waitress." "Oh, I think you do," Rocco sneered, his face inches from hers. "My shipment. $20 million. Gone. The night after you served my table. That's a hell of a coincidence, don't you think? Who do you work for? O'Malley? The Triads? Who paid you to listen? No one. I swear, she cried, her voice cracking. I have to get home. Please, my mother is sick. I just want to go home to my mother. It was the phrase, the signal. Rocco's patience snapped. He drew back his hand and struck her across the face. The slap was sharp, brutal, echoing in the vast, empty space. Callah's head whipped to the side, a trickle of blood appearing at the corner of her lip. Wrong answer, Rocco growled, raising his hand again. Before his hand could fall, a sound from outside froze him. Not a siren. Something quieter. A soft metallic thump, followed by another. Then silence. Frankie, standing by the door, looked nervous. Boss? What was that? Before Rocco could answer, the massive corrugated steel door of the warehouse didn't just open, it imploded. A shaped charge blew it off its hinges, sending it flying inward with a deafening boom. Through the smoke and dust, 6 figures emerged. They were clad in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by ballistic masks, and they moved with a terrifying, silent precision. Rocco's thugs, who had been laughing moments before, barely had time to draw their weapons before they were neutralized. There were no gunshots, only the soft hiss of compressed air and the thud of bodies hitting the concrete floor. In less than 10 seconds, it was over. Rocco and a whimpering Frankie were the only ones left standing. Silas stepped through the ruined doorway, his face grim. He walked directly to Callah, produced a small, wicked-looking blade, and sliced through her bonds. He helped her to her feet, his expression a mixture of fury and concern. He handed her a sleek, black tablet. Callah stood, her posture changing instantly. The frightened waitress vanished, replaced by a queen surveying her domain. She slowly, deliberately, wiped the blood from her lip with the back of her hand. She looked at Rocco, and for the first time, he saw her. Not the waitress, but the woman behind the mask. Her eyes were chips of ice, burning with a cold, controlled rage. You wanted to know who I work for, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. She turned the tablet so Rocco could see the screen. It displayed a complex banking interface. A progress bar was rapidly filling. A number at the top of the screen was plummeting. His number, from his untraceable Cayman Islands account. Transfer in progress. 50,000. Rocco's jaw went slack. His face turned the color of ash. What is this? How did you consider it a stupidity tax? Callah said, her voice cutting through the air like a shard of glass. A down payment for the slap, for the inconvenience, and for the waterlogged $100 bill you were so proud of. She pulled out a satellite phone and dialed a single number. Chief Inspector Davies, I have an anonymous tip. There's an illegal arms cache being stored at Warehouse 7 on the West End docks. The property is leased to a shell corporation owned by Rocco Gallo. I'd hurry if I were you. He looks like he's about to leave town. She hung up. In the distance, the faint, unmistakable wail of police sirens began to grow louder. Silas and his team melted back into the shadows, as silently as they had appeared. Callah walked toward the gaping hole where the door used to be, pausing at the threshold. She looked back at the stunned, broken man standing amidst the wreckage of his authority. You should have just paid the check, Rocco, she said softly. Then she was gone. Rocco Gallo was a man unaccustomed to losing. He made bail, of course. His lawyers were expensive and effective, but the damage was done. $50 million had vanished. A federal arms trafficking charge now hung over his head like a guillotine. And worst of all, He had been publicly humiliated. The story of his arrest in his own warehouse, surrounded by his unconscious men, was spreading through the underworld like wildfire. The bull was wounded, and the sharks were beginning to circle. His obsession, however, was not with the feds or his rivals. It was with her, the waitress, the ghost who had dismantled a piece of his empire and then vanished. He put every resource he had into finding her. He tore the city apart. But Mia the waitress had never existed. Her employment records were fake, her address was a vacant lot, her social security number belonged to a woman who had died in 1978. She was a phantom. Meanwhile, Kala was hunting. The midpoint victory was just that, a midpoint. It had shaken Rocco, made him bleed. Now she intended to sever his head. "He's protected," Silas reported, his face illuminated by the glow of a holographic display in Kala's command center. "His political cover is Councilman Richard Sterling, chairman of the City Zoning Committee. Sterling has been blocking federal investigations and fast-tracking Gallo's construction permits for years. In return, Gallo fills his campaign coffers and a very private offshore account." "We need proof," Kala said, her eyes fixed on Sterling's smiling face on the screen. Irrefutable proof that will burn them both to the ground. The link is Gallo's accountant, Leo Petrov, a degenerate gambler, but a meticulous bookkeeper. He holds the digital ledgers that connect Gallo to Sterling. He keeps them on an air-gapped, encrypted drive in a vault in his office. Kala's lips curved into a slight smile. "A gambler, you say? Perfect." The poker game was held in the penthouse of a luxury hotel, a place thick with cigar smoke and the quiet desperation of rich men. Kala entered not as a waitress, but as a creature of wealth and mystique. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored black dress, her hair down, her face a mask of cool disinterest. She bought into the game with a quiet word and a black credit card with no name and no limit. Leo Petrov was easy to spot. He was sweating, despite the air conditioning, and his plays were reckless. He was chasing losses. Kala played patiently, folding mediocre hands, watching, learning his tells, the way he tapped his finger when he was bluffing, the slight flare of his nostrils when he held a winning hand. For 2 hours, she let him win small pots, lulling him into a false sense of security. Then she began to dismantle him. She raised when he bluffed, forcing him to fold. She called his biggest bets, revealing better hands. Her face was stone, her eyes giving away nothing. The pile of chips in front of her grew into a mountain. The final hand was brutal. Leo was all in. Kala called without a moment's hesitation. He laid down a full house. The table sighed. Kala slowly turned over her cards, revealing 4 of a kind. Leo stared at her cards, his face collapsing. He was ruined. Later, Kala found him on the balcony, staring down at the city lights. "You're a good player," he said, his voice hollow. "You're not," she replied, her voice soft. "You're an addict, and Rocco Gallo owns your addiction." He flinched. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You owe him over $500,000, Kala stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "And you just lost another 200,000. He's not a forgiving man, Leo. I, on the other hand, can be." She stepped closer. "I want his ledgers, the real ones, the ones that connect him to Councilman Sterling." Leo laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You're crazy, that's a death sentence." "So is your debt," Kala countered. "Give me the ledgers, and I will wipe your slate clean. Not just with the men at that table, but with Gallo. I will give you a new name, a new life, a plane ticket to anywhere in the world. Refuse me, and I'll walk away. Rocco will find out about tonight, and he'll collect his debt from your skin." She placed a small, encrypted burner phone on the railing. "You have 1 hour to decide if you want to keep living your life or start a new one." She turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the choice. 47 minutes later, the phone buzzed. It was a set of schematics for an office building and a complex series of security codes. Leo had made his choice. That night, Silas moved through the darkened office building like a wraith. He bypassed laser grids, pressure plates, and thermal sensors with practiced ease. Reaching the vault, he used a cryo-lance to freeze the electronic lock, shattering its circuits. Inside, he found the hard drive. Cloning it was a tense, 20-minute process, an eternity when every second felt like a footstep in the hall. He was out of the building before the first security guard began his morning rounds. Back at the penthouse, Calla plugged the cloned drive into her system. The encryption was military-grade, a nightmare of cascading algorithms. For 16 straight hours, she worked, fueled by black coffee and cold fury. Code scrolled across the screens, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She wasn't just a strategist, she was a world-class hacker. Then, she was in, and it was all there. A meticulous record of bribes, laundered money, and secret meetings. Dates, amounts, account numbers. A digital dagger pointed straight at the heart of Rocco Gallo and Richard Sterling. "Silas," she said, her voice tight with triumph. "Find out the date of Councilman Sterling's next public appearance. Something big, something flashy. I want an audience." Silas brought up a file. "The annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. He's the guest of honor. It's the biggest philanthropic event of the year. The entire city's elite will be there." He paused. "Gallo is a primary sponsor. He'll be in attendance." Calla looked at the invitation on the screen, a picture of Sterling smiling benevolently. Her own smile was anything but. "Perfect," she whispered. "Let's send out the invitations to the execution." The Grand Imperial Ballroom was a sea of black ties and glittering jewels, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of powerful conversations. Calla made her entrance not with a bang, but with a quiet ripple of intrigue. She wore a gown of emerald green silk that seemed to drink the light, her only adornment a simple, antique locket at her throat. She was no longer Mia the waitress or the shadowy figure in the command center. Tonight, she was Calla, her name on the guest list as a last-minute, 7-figure donation from an anonymous benefactor, a fact that had the city's gossip columnists buzzing. Rocco Gallo was holding court near the bar, a monument to his own ego. He had weathered the storm of the warehouse raid. His lawyers had spun it as a misunderstanding, a frame job by his rivals. He was out on bail, and by sponsoring this gala, he was projecting an aura of untouchable power. He laughed loudly, a sound that grated on the ears, slapping the backs of judges and senators. The strain was there, a tightness around his eyes, but he wore his arrogance like armor. He saw Calla across the room, a vision of grace and old money, and his predator's instinct kicked in. He didn't know her, but he knew her kind. She was a piece on the board he needed to identify, and, if possible, control. His ego, ever his master, demanded he approach her. "I don't believe we've had the pleasure," he said, his voice a low purr as he stepped into her path, his bulk blocking out the room. He took her hand, intending to kiss it, a gesture of faux chivalry. "Rocco Gallo." Calla let him take her hand, but turned it just so, a subtle movement that denied him the kiss. She met his eyes, a slow, cryptic smile playing on her lips. "Are you sure about that?" "I feel as if I know you intimately, Rocco." The use of his first name, so familiar and yet so cold, threw him off balance. His eyes narrowed. I have a memorable face, but a face like yours, a woman like you, I would have remembered. Perhaps you weren't looking closely enough, Calla replied, her voice smooth as velvet as she retrieved her hand. Sometimes people see only what they expect to see. A uniform, an apron, a name tag. You see, that's always been your weakness, Rocco. You only look down, never around. A flicker of confusion crossed Rocco's face, a shadow of a memory he couldn't quite grasp. He leaned in, his voice dropping, the smell of whiskey and cigar smoke on his breath. Listen, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is my city. A little trouble with the feds doesn't change that. You'd be wise to remember who you're talking to. Oh, I know exactly who I'm talking to, she said, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. Her eyes never left his. You're the man who prefers the corner booth at Trattoria Bellucci, even when it's taken. You send back a perfectly good 98 Chateau Margaux because you enjoy the performance of it, not because it's corked. And your tips, well, they're unforgettable. You leave exactly $100. The blood began to drain from Rocco's face. The cigar in his hand suddenly felt slick with sweat. His forced smile tightened into a grimace. Trattoria Bellucci. The name hit him like a physical blow. He looked at her, truly looked at her, past the silk and the poise. He saw the shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw. He heard the echo of a different voice, a humbler voice, and the memory of a defiant, steady gaze from a waitress he had crushed under his heel. The two images, the servant and the queen, fused in his mind with a sickening lurch. You, he breathed, the word a strangled choke. The room seemed to tilt. The chandeliers swam in his vision. Me, she confirmed, her smile turning sharp as a razor's edge. Did you ever wonder why your usual steakhouse was suddenly closed for a gas leak that night, Rocco? Did you think it was just bad luck that you ended up at that specific restaurant? I've been setting this board for a year. You didn't just wander into my path. I led you there. Every step you've taken for the last month has been on a path I paved. Before he could process this, before the rage could find purchase, the lights dimmed and a spotlight fell on the stage. Councilman Richard Sterling, beaming and self-satisfied, stepped up to the podium to a round of polite applause. As a waiter passed, Calla caught his eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. The waiter was Julian, the maître d' from the trattoria. He looked older, his face etched with weariness, but as his eyes met Calla's, there was a spark of solidarity. 2 nights ago, Mia had found him as he was leaving work. She had shown him evidence of how Rocco had systematically bankrupted a dozen other small businesses in his neighborhood. She didn't offer him money. She offered him a chance to restore the dignity Rocco had stripped from him in front of his own staff. All he had to do was replace the councilman's cufflink on the lectern with an identical one she provided. It was a small act of rebellion he felt compelled to make. My dear friends, patrons, pillars of our great city, Sterling began, his voice smooth and practiced. It is with a full heart that I stand before you tonight, to celebrate the generosity that makes this city truly great. As he spoke, the massive screens behind him, meant to display a slideshow of smiling children and hospital wings, flickered. For a split second they went black. Then they flashed back to life. The entire ballroom, filled with the city's most influential figures and a dozen press cameras, fell silent. Instead of the slideshow, the screens showed a bank statement, a crystal-clear image of an offshore account in the councilman's name with a balance of over $8 million. Then, a series of wire transfers appeared, one after another, each originating from a shell corporation owned by Rocco Gallo. The amounts were staggering, the descriptions thinly veiled. Zoning consultation, permit expediting fee. A collective gasp, sharp and loud, tore through the ballroom. Sterling stopped talking, his face frozen in a rictus of horror. He stared at the screens, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, the audio system crackled to life, hijacking the microphone. It wasn't Sterling's voice anymore. It was a recording, captured by Julian's cufflink just an hour before. Tinny, but clear. A frantic, panicked conversation between two men in a backstage hallway. "You promised me you were untouchable, Rocco." It was Sterling's voice, raw with fear. "That warehouse raid. The feds are sniffing around my zoning approvals for the waterfront. They have soil samples from the condemned land. You've put my entire career at risk. My life is over if this gets out." "Calm down," Rocco's recorded voice growled back, impatient and dismissive. "You're paid to handle these things. You've been paid very well. Just make it go away like you always do. Bury it. Or we both go down, Richard. And you know who will have a worse time in prison." The ballroom was utterly silent. The only sound was the frantic clicking of press cameras. Every eye darted from Sterling at the podium, who looked like he was about to faint, to Rocco, who stood as if turned to stone. His face was a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated fury. He scanned the crowd wildly, looking for the source of his ruin. His gaze landed on Calla. She hadn't moved. She was still smiling that same, knowing smile. The waitress, the girl in the warehouse, the poker player who broke his accountant, the ghost who had haunted him. It was all her. As if on cue, the ballroom doors at every exit swung open simultaneously. Men and women in dark suits with federal agent insignias swarmed into the room, their movements calm and purposeful. They ignored the panicked whispers and flashing cameras. Two of them walked directly to the stage and placed a stunned, weeping Richard Sterling in handcuffs. Rocco turned to run, to escape, to simply move, but a solid form blocked his path. It was Silas, now dressed in the crisp uniform of the hotel's head of security, his expression impassive. There was nowhere to go. The agents surrounded Rocco, their voices professional and firm as they informed him of his rights. He didn't listen. His eyes were locked on Calla, a burning beacon in the chaos. As they pulled his arms behind his back, the rage finally boiled over, shattering his composure into a million pieces. "Who are you?" he screamed, his voice cracking, the sound echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "Who are you?" Calla finally let her smile fall, replaced by an expression of cold judgment. She raised her glass in a mock toast. "My name is Calla Bellucci," she said, her voice a silken whisper that was for his ears only. "Does that name mean anything to you? Of course not. But my father's did. Marco Bellucci. He owned a small, honest restaurant. Trattoria Bellucci. You bled him dry with your protection rackets until he had nothing left. He died a year later. My mother, her sickness was a broken heart." She reached up and touched the locket at her throat. "You asked me in the warehouse what I wanted. I said I wanted to go home to my mother. That wasn't a code, Rocco. It was a promise that I would restore the honor you stole from our family name in the very room where you parade your stolen wealth." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to ice. "Oh, and that $100 bill? The one you made me fish out of a glass of water? I had it professionally dried and framed. It's been hanging over my primary terminal for the last 2 weeks. Every line of code I wrote to dismantle your life, every asset I seized, I did it looking at your petty, pathetic insult. You told me to wash it before I spent it. I did. And I spent it on the data subscription that cracked your accountant's encryption. It was the best investment I ever made. A little something for your trouble." They slammed him against the hood of a sedan in the porte cochere, the flashing lights a garish parody of the gala's glamour. His journey of shame took him not through the front doors, but through the service corridors of the Grand Hotel. The same hidden pathways that the waiters and busboys and maids used every day. And as he was paraded past them in his $1,000 suit and his $1 million shame, they all stopped what they were doing. The kitchen staff, the valets, the laundry workers, all the invisible people he had bullied, ignored, and stepped on his entire life. They didn't cheer. They didn't jeer. They just watched. Julian stood among them, his back straight, his expression clear. Their collective silence was a verdict, a final, crushing judgment more powerful than any court could deliver. In their quiet, dignified eyes, Rocco Gallo saw his true reflection for the first time. A small, pathetic man, rendered utterly insignificant. Back in the now empty ballroom, the chaos had subsided. Silas appeared at Cala's side. "It's done," he said quietly. "Leo Petrov is on a plane to Buenos Aires with a new identity. Your family name is cleared. The city has seized Gallo's assets to compensate his victims." Cala turned from the scene, her gaze drifting to the vast, floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sprawling city. The lights twinkled below like a fallen constellation, a world full of predators and prey, of bullies and victims. She opened the locket. Inside was a faded photograph of a smiling man and woman standing proudly in front of a small, charming restaurant named Trattoria Bellucci. "No," she said, closing the locket with a soft click, her voice filled with a new, unwavering purpose as she looked out upon her kingdom. "It's just getting started."